Yeah, folks, a new Hearthstone expansion has been revealed, and it's a pretty sick one. Hearthstone Cataclysm, and as you can already see here on screen, Colossals are returning as well, which may be one of my all-time favorite mechanics in Hearthstone, the crazy giant sea creatures. But now they're apparently going to be crazy giant versions of iconic characters we know and love, like Ragnaros here returning as a new legendary and warrior. This is Ragnaros the Great Fire, still an 8 mana, 8/8 colossal +2, meaning he's going to summon 2 of those appendages automatically anytime the base version enters play. Then he also reads, at the end of your turn, trigger your death rattles. Now that, of course, would work for any death rattles that have stuck behind on board, but also the hands of Ragnaros here as appendages, as you can see, read, death rattle, deal 2 damage to a random enemy. So you're going to summon Ragnaros, you're going to get 3 bodies on board, and you're going to start dealing 2 damage pings. Now you'll notice one other line of text there. This one's very important and a little bit confusing to explain. But it's called Herald, which is another new keyword. And as you herald or play cards with the Herald keyword, you're going to start upgrading your hands of Ragnaros. So we can see here an example of a card with the Herald keyword. This is a neutral minion, Envoy of the End. It is a 5 mana, 5/4 taunt battle cry, Herald your Colossal. Now, when you herald, you're also going to be summoning basically a stand-in of one of Ragnaros's appendages, but they're going to be called soldiers. So this is a soldier of Ragnaros, and there are going to be other classes who have these same sort of heralding style effects. It seems we have the kind of multi-class insignia on this neutral. You'll see, we're going to see another example of that very shortly. So there's going to be certain classes that have heralded colossi. Now, as you'll read on all of these, right? I'm sorry this is so confusing. It's a lot to get through. They say herald twice. So basically, you'll play an Envoy of the End or a different herald card, a second Envoy of the End. Then they're going to start upgrading after that. At that point, all of your future soldiers and the hands of Ragnaros themselves, or any other colossal appendages that are a part of the herald package, they are all going to have their numbers doubled. So their stats are going to double. They'll become 4 2s, and they will then deal 4 damage to a random enemy. Then you can do it again and double it again up to what in that case would be an 8/4 and 8 damage from the death rattle here on these soldiers of Ragnaros. Then they're capped out. They can only double twice. They're fully upgraded at that stage. So basically what that means is if you play 4 herald cards throughout the course of the game, you're not only going to get, the body and the soldiers right away, and again, each of these has their own little death rattle chips as well, but you're going to be upgrading eventually to where at some point Ragnaros the Great Fire is going to automatically summon 8/4 hands of Ragnaros. So they're going to have 3 8-attack minions on board. Each of those hands is going to deal 8 damage to a random enemy, which of course Ragnaros is also going to set off as well. So he's instantly going to do 16 damage. Maybe some will hit minions, maybe some will hit face, but then remember your hands are still on board. So the opponent still has that problem to solve where there's another 16 damage sitting on board. So they're kind of like crazy boom bots basically at that stage where it's like, oh my God, how do I deal with all of this stuff? So in essence, you're building your deck with this big crazy payoff colossal. You're running herald cards along the way to upgrade your soldiers. Also remember at some point, your herald cards are going to be summoning 8/4s that deal 8 damage. So like the first couple herald cards you play might be pretty low tempo. If you just slam an Envoy of the End, you're getting a 5/4 taunt and a 2/1 deal 2. You're kind of getting like a little boom bot summoned basically on your 5/4 taunt. Not terrible, but not exciting. But by the time you get to the third one and it's summoning a 4/2 that deals 4, suddenly much more notable. By the time you get to the 5th one, summoning an 8/4 that deals 8. That's a crazy play and makes your Ragnaros a crazy play. So it's all about basically this setup, and we don't know what all the herald cards look like just yet, but presumably some are going to be class cards, some are going to be cheaper, allowing you to more kind of conveniently build up to your big Ragnaros by the time you hit, for instance, turn 8, and this just becomes like a bomb basically that I think could very easily win games and swing games super hard. I think any future Ragnaros you get will probably already be fully heralded too, just based on the way these things work in the past. I don't know all the details on all the questions there yet, but basically this is a monster threat at that stage as long as you're playing it with your heralds. You could theoretically run this without the heralds. I don't think it's totally terrible for the record because it's just like, you know, 3 big wide bodies, but you probably do want to commit to the heralds to make it feel worth it. And there's a second reason you might want to do that, which is a new hero card, Deathwing Worldbreaker. This one is 10 mana. It has 12 freaking armor. Battle cry, choose 1 Cataclysm to unleash. You'll see the Cataclysms there on the right. And then you can also herald twice to upgrade, which is going to upgrade the number of Cataclysms. I don't think that's going to upgrade your hero power here. That would just be too insane if that doubled. But the hero power is also pretty nice in its own right. It's just +5 attack this turn, which is a ton of extra attack. But the Cataclysms will upgrade, so that means you can basically choose 2 or then eventually choose 4. I don't think the numbers on the individual Cataclysms upgrade, just the number of Cataclysms that you're unleashing. But you can see here these effects deal 4 damage to all enemy minions, shuffle 5 random legendary dragons into your deck, they cost 1, summon a 12/12 dragon, or destroy the highest health enemy minion. Imagine getting all 4 of those on your battle cry while also getting 12 armor and getting +5 attack. That is an enormous game state swing, right? Where you're potentially wiping out your opponent's board with the raise. You are killing any big leftover stuff with topple, basically. You're summoning your own 12/12 and getting some potential bombs put into your deck as well, while also, you know, again, setting up just an absolutely nutty sort of hero power. So this becomes an enormous swing card. Again, once you have played 4 heralds, your next thing can be Deathwing, and it's going to be a really nice payoff. So you have like the Colossal. If that doesn't get you there, you've also got Deathwing as a follow-up to potentially get you there, creating a 1-2 punch for herald decks that's absolutely nuts. Is Deathwing good enough again to play without herald cards? I don't think so. Like these Cataclysms you're unleashing aren't really great on their own. You kind of need multiples, I think, for it to feel worth it. You know, just getting a 12/12. There are turns you would do that. Get a 12/12, take 12 armor, and gain +5 attack. Would it be worth it in your deck always? It'd be hard for some decks to fit that in. But when you get, you know, 2 to 4 of these, like, man, that is certainly going to be an enormous swing turn and totally worth it in those instances, because you're just creating, you know, a win condition of sorts with this hero power that's eventually going to grind people out with just, you know, inevitable damage. 5 every single turn really starts stacking up. Any other ways to scale off of that can go even further. So ultimately, another just big time late game bomb. I think we'll certainly find some decks here that are able to piece together a Herald's Colossal Deathwing package, which means for sure Deathwing is going to be a really powerful card and a great end game win condition swing and lethal push all at once, basically, with that hero power. So I think Deathwing's really strong. I think Ragnaros looks crazy high potential because of his lethality. And I think, you know, the Herald cards, you're probably going to need a critical mass of those for it to make sense. So probably the Herald cards are also going to be good, although I could imagine this one being a little bit more expensive than you'd like. That said, you know, it's got taunt, so that helps a little. And of course, we can see these are pretty late game plays. So, you know, running 5 cost cards is not going to be the end of the world for these decks. So all in all, this Herald and Colossal package looks pretty nuts so far. And we're actually not done with Colossals, because there are going to be some Colossals that are not part of the Deathwing Herald crew. They are separate. Chromatus here for Paladin, a perfect example of that. This one is also an 8 mana 8/8. It's a Dragon Colossal +4. This one has Taunt, Lifesteal, Elusive, and Divine Shield. So a big pile of annoying stuff to deal with. It's also here got 4 bodies. Each of those are going to have one of those 4 keywords: Divine Shield, Lifesteal, Elusive, and Taunt. But anytime they die, that keyword is then removed from Chromatus. So, you know, it's just like a pile of garbage to deal with for your opponent, where, you know, 2 things have Divine Shield, 2 things have Taunt, which, you know, the taunts could make it kind of awkward to get through to the other ones. It's like, well, man, I really want to remove Divine Shield and Elusive from Chromatus so that it's easier to kill Chromatus, but in order to do that, I have to kill the Elusive and Divine Shield guys, and to get to those with minion attacks, I have to get through the taunt guy, and Chromatus still has taunt. I mean, once you kill the taunt guy, Chromatus's taunt goes away. So, you know, it's really kind of just a one-step taunt removal. But it just becomes this real headache to piece this all together where it's like, good God. And it's just, you know, 2/3s aren't huge, but they're also not tiny. So it's just an in-a-can instant board and threat development. I could imagine, you know, synergies on top of that. We still got some like Divine Shield stuff laying around in Paladin, so it could make it even harder sometimes to work through all of this. You also might inadvertently heal the Paladin a ton while solving all these problems because, you know, Chromatus has lifesteal. You might leave behind a little lifesteal dragon sometimes. So like, you know, is this like an instant game winner? No, I don't think it's like so decisive on board that it's an instant game winner, but is it a big problem? Is it the kind of top end you can run in a mid-range deck where it's just the final threat, the final piece of the puzzle? Yeah, I think it fits into that slot rather nicely. Also, Dragon and Divine Shield synergies to consider, both of which I think make this card pretty high promise, despite being a little more straightforward, a little less lethal than the other Colossal or Deathwing Herald stuff we've seen so far. I still think this is, you know, a nice independent threat, which a lot of the Colossals from the first time around served exactly that purpose, where they just kind of came down, they were their big own independent thing, and that worked, and that made them playable. I think Chromatus slots in perfectly as a great example of that kind of card. So next up here, we've got another new keyword. This is Shatter, the long-rumored Shatter. You guys may remember the misplaced Pyromancer from last set was kind of teasing this keyword Shatter. When you shatter a card, deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. Well, we now know what Shatter is. Basically, anytime a Shatter card enters your hand, it will then split in 2. So whether that's being drawn, like, you know, randomly discovered, found, whatever, it's going to split into 2 and it's going to move to the opposite ends of your hand. So one will go to the left, one will go to the far right. Then those are 2 cards, so like each half gets 1 half of the effect of the card. You can see here the top one is summon 2 4/2 drakes, the bottom one is give your minions +1/+1 and Divine Shield. When they recombine, after you play everything out of the middle, when they recombine, they turn back into 1 card, thereby of course, you know, making them way stronger because it's basically half the mana cost at that stage. So for instance, summoning 2 4/2 drakes for 4 mana, you might do it sometimes. Not a terrible play, but not a super exciting play. And then you've also got the other half, give your minions +1/+1 and Divine Shield for 4 mana. Again, you might do that sometimes. It's not a terrible play. It's not the best play you've ever had, though. But when you combine them, summoning 2 4/2 drakes and giving them all +1/+1 and Divine Shield, that's an insane 4 mana turn, right? Like, that's crazy because you're basically getting 2 5/3 drakes with Divine Shield for only 4 mana and potentially buffing anything else on board. Any little leftover 1/1s become an interesting little threat too. So this is a really interesting little design, right? Where you've kind of got these decision points where it's like, well, do I just take this now or do I wait? Am I going to get to a stage where I can empty my hand basically fast enough to recombine these 2 things? You know, how many cards do I have in hand when that happens? If you're running like a super aggressive Paladin, as we've sort of seen in the past with all the little tiny token guys, you might have a fairly empty hand when you draw this. Like, you might only have 2 or 3 things in hand anyway, or 0 things in hand, and it just instantly combines, and this becomes a crazy good follow-up for a token deck that already has a really wide board. So I actually think this card leans really well into sort of the archetype or game plan that supports the Shatter mechanic. You know, shattered cards might be really hard to use successfully, say in a control deck that's just like sitting on a bunch of high cost cards, has a ton of resources in hand constantly. You draw one, you might have 7 8 high cost cards in between your shattered cards. So I think, you know, really low cost, more flexible curve decks that can just toss out a bunch of stuff really quickly play rather nicely for Shatter. We've seen that work a little bit in Paladin, although of course post rotation everything's going to shift out a little bit. They'll lose some of those tools, but we've still seen that work successfully in Paladin. You know, and this is a great Divine Shield buff for Paladin, which is another angle we have there. So ultimately, I think this looks pretty good, man. I think this could be a really powerful play in the right decks. And I don't think the floor is a disaster either. Sometimes you will take the buff and Divine Shield for 4 mana because it's worth it, even if they don't shatter. Sometimes you'll take the Drakes because you just need something to do. So the fact that it's like okay when it's split and insane when it's combined, I think that's a good recipe. I think that means this card looks pretty strong and could definitely fit some Paladin game plans. Moving on to a new card that's really interesting, Chamber of the Aspects. This one is another Paladin card. This one allows you to choose a minion in your hand. You're hearing that correctly. We finally have the ability to choose cards in hand. You've probably maybe never even really consciously thought about this too much, but any hand-based effect in Hearthstone has always been random. You've never been able to select a card in your hand to target it specifically, only on board, right? But now finally we get to choose what gets the buff here from Chamber of Aspects. So if you have, you know, like a Dark Gift charge card in hand and you really wanted that to get your buff, guess what? Now you can, thanks to Chamber of Aspects. You have like a Divine Shield Lifesteal Rush card. You really wanted to give a buff because you care a lot about that lifesteal and rush aspect. Guess what? Now you can target it instead of having to rely on a wide hand aspect or just hoping that you randomly hit the right sort of thing, which number one, awesome that technology exists. Finally, that could change a lot of card design, and we're going to see some examples already in this video, and I'm sure more throughout the expansion. But also, I think that makes this card pretty good. I think just targeted buffs like that mean, you know, they have so much more immediacy and impact once that minion finally hits, because you can choose. You can also build around them. Like I said, give it to charge minions for lethality, give it for survivability, whatever it is. Becomes a lot more interesting. So I think this is a solid little location that can result in some high impact plays. We know hand buff for Paladin too can work really well through that Divine Shield, Lifesteal lens. All of that is great. So really cool that this exists, and I think also to boot a pretty good card on top of that. Moving on to a new neutral legendary. I think this one is just available today if you log in. This is War Master Blackhorn. He is a 7-mana 6/6. And he has Battle Cry, destroy all cards that cost 2 or less in both players' hands and decks, which kind of a crazy effect, right? There's like a lot of different ways to take this. Number one is like the ability to just like wipe out, you know, random little stuff that's been generated and added to the deck, whether that's like 1-cost dragons like we just saw with Deathwing. You can think about like all the little meteors and all that sort of stuff. Like shreds, I think, in Shred Warlock. You know, there's a handful of different things that could all be deleted because they've been shuffled into the deck. I think bombs cost too much, so bombs wouldn't fit there. But it's not just generated cards, it's all cards, right? So if your opponent is relying on low cost stuff, you know, if they've played a Quasar in Quasar Rogue and all of their stuff is really cheap, you could basically just delete their entire deck. So the ability to delete like key cards or resources or spicy stuff from the opponent is a really intriguing like tech card of sorts. There's also this other application for you where, you know, maybe you have a deck that has a mix of a lot of little stuff and some big stuff, and you get into a stage of the game where it's like, man, I don't really need that little stuff anymore. I'm a late game deck. I want to hit my bombs. I don't want to have to draw through all this little garbage. You could technically use your War Master Blackhorn to like delete all of your small stuff and just like filter your deck down to your best hits basically, while also hopefully, you know, punishing the opponent a little bit in the same way. That feels, I don't know, like I don't really want to spend 7 mana to do that. Like you are basically taking a pass on board here, which is going to be the biggest risk I think for this card. It's like, when do I have time to play a 7-mana 6/6? Maybe freshly after a rotation would be like the best time to have a low power meta where you do that. But now I'm thinking like, man, you're just going to draw your opponent into their Colossal quicker and stuff because you've killed a bunch of small cards in their deck. Suddenly they're way more likely to hit their Deathwing, their Colossal, their big bombs and stuff. So is it really worth it if, you know, it's symmetrical in that case? Like it could be if you do the same thing, but like, man, I don't know, taking this giant downturn to do that, it doesn't feel very symmetrical when the opponent still gets to play their game and then you don't. You have to take a really, really bad turn in the meantime. So I don't know, interesting card, fun design. I'm sure there's some like creative or silly stuff that can happen with this, some cheese that can happen with this. But as a sort of tech card or enabler, I don't really see it being all that consistent or powerful. I think it's going to be a hard one to squeeze in just because it is such a down tempo play. If this costs like 5, if it was a 5-mana 5/5, I'd be a lot more intrigued by it. But I think it's 7. That is just such a prohibitively high cost. It's going to be hard to make this one work. So moving on to Hunter here. This is Abyssian, a 7-mana 6/6 legendary. He's got a battle cry. Your dragons have rush this game, which is nice. We've seen a lot of these this game effects can go a long way because they just like completely warp how the game plays out. But it reads also, while in hand, play a dragon to become a 12/12 dragon, which when you got a 7-mana card sitting in hand, if you're running a dragon hunter, presumably, which this is pointing towards, that's going to happen, right? So you can kind of assume that this is going to be a 12/12 rush dragon for 7 mana that also makes all of your future dragons great, including any dragons, you know, summoned. Just all dragons have rush. So I don't know. I think that's pretty intriguing. You're not maybe totally in love with a 7 mana 12/12 rushing dragon, but it's probably enough of a balance between a threat and, you know, a defense that it's okay. In other words, you know, you trade into your opponent's 5/5 or whatever. It's not like you're too crazy behind on board, but you're setting yourself up for a game state that's potentially very scary later on. It's a little bit hard to envision this without seeing the rest of the set and what's like planned for Dragon Hunter and how powerful all of that can be. But it feels like this is modeling itself towards this kind of like mid-rangey hunter where it's just like a bunch of big dragons start coming down maybe on turn 5, 6, 7, 8 or whatever. And you kind of hope to just overwhelm your opponent with giant bodies that are keeping their board in check thanks to all the rush. So, you know, a bunch of like 8/3 dragons left behind after trades or whatever. And it's like eventually that overwhelms the opponent. 1 or 2 sneak through, and that's probably enough to kind of push the opponent over with big bodies. So I think that's an interesting idea. I think that's pretty cool. Not necessarily something Hunter has historically played super well to, and I don't know that they would have the perfect support cards for that either. This feels like kind of one of those things where they like go all in for a set maybe, and that's kind of it, and then it goes away, and it's like, did this really get there or not? That's, I guess, what I'd be a little bit worried on for this one. But I will say, ultimately, like, this in and of itself is a very powerful effect. This game style effect, that kind of permanence, big body here. I think Abyssian is easy to activate and really promising on its delivery. So, you know, if it's going to work, this definitely feels like it would be the star of the show in that case. So next up here is another one of our Shattered cards. So again, remember, when this enters your hand, it's going to split into 2 different cards. One of them is a 4-mana draw 3 minions. The other is a 4-mana give minions in your hand +2/+2. Again, I will say, like, neither of those are a disaster, I don't think, right? They're kind of like bad playable cards, if that makes sense. Like, sometimes drawing 3 minions for 4 will absolutely be fine because you have a ton of spare mana. You just want to find some stuff to do. And sometimes a hand buff like that will be fine. It's a pretty decent, you know, it's a big hand buff. 4 mana is a lot, but it's a big hand buff. That said, when these are combined, insane, right? Like, crazy strong card. Draw 3 things, instantly buff them a ton. It is still kind of a slow card, right? It's one that is passive on board. It does not have any kind of immediate impact. It does, again, kind of point me towards that mid-rangey Dragon Hunter thing, though, where it's like, hey, I'm just going to keep overwhelming you. Like, on turn 4, I'm loading my hand up with stuff, making it more likely I find a dragon for Abyssian. Abyssian's now going to be, like, I guess a 14/14 dragon, assuming that it works that way. Maybe you could time it out where it works that way. Worst case, still a 12/12, but a bunch of other buffed dragons that are now even bigger and all have rush. And it's like, man, that is going to be an overwhelming force as you get through the mid game immediately after your supply run here. The challenge, though, then, right, is the shattering. If your deck's full of, like, bigger mid-range dragons, how hard is it to shatter these together, right? Like, how hard is it to get them? That's where it's like, oh man, my Abyssian's like stuck in the middle or whatever, and it's like, oh man. So, like, it might come down a little too late or be too awkward where you don't get to play this on turn 4 and lead into the mid game. Instead, you're like playing this on turn 8 or something, and it's more of like a catch-up mechanic, but then you don't maybe have enough mana left over to make a good play after that. So this one, like I talked about with Paladin, how I think that aligns really well with the mechanic and the class. This one I'm seeing a little bit of a harder time for. Now, maybe, again, you could run this in a super aggressive hunter, ditch the dragon stuff. Maybe the art here is bait, and you're just running like an aggressive token hunter. Makes more sense there, but hand buff is a little bit more mid-gamey than aggressive, right? Like, it can be aggressive, but you need lethality off the hand buffs. You need, like, charge minions, big swings on board. So, like, can you find a middle ground there where you're able to do all of that effectively? Maybe. I'm not writing it off. I just think it's less clear of a line for me than Paladin. I think this one's a bit of a harder fit. It's kind of pulling itself in a couple different directions. Kind of more of like a value mid-game build as opposed to a full-on aggression, because, you know, that was an on-board buff. This is a hand buff. Everything gets delayed or pushed back a little bit, right? So ultimately just not quite as obvious of a line, and therefore I think probably just a little weaker of a card. So moving on here to the Battlefield Blaster. This is a new 3-mana 3/4. This one is another choose a spell in your hand card to give spell damage +1. So using this new mechanic to great effect. Targeting a spell to give spell damage. That's cool because it's like normally, you play a spell damage minion, it kind of has to stick there for the spells. But at the same time, it's like, man, I don't want to spend 3-mana 3/4 to just get 1 extra damage, right? Some spells do certainly benefit from spell damage more than others, so being able to hit those can be a key thing if they have like multiple ticks or whatever. Like in theory, it could be worth it. There's like battle cry manipulations too, play a couple of these with the Chronolord Dios or something, get a bunch of spell damage on 1 spell. There's fun stuff to do there, but I just don't really see it lining up all that often. Where you're like excited to do this. I think it'll be fine. It's not the disaster to play a 3-mana 3/4, but it's just like, as far as like combos or lethality or OTK is concerned, there's probably better ways to do it than this. You'd probably rather spend your early game drawing cards, surviving, as opposed to this pretty meager setup card, I guess, in essence. All right, so next up here are actually not cards from Hearthstone Cataclysm. They are like some event cards and stuff that also got shown off here today. This is the Dark Iron Harbinger, a 4-mana 7/4 death rattle. Summon a 0/7 Doomsayer that destroys all minions at the start of your turn, which is just regular Doomsayer, right? But this becomes this picky little piloted Doomsayer, a tricky little piloted Doomsayer where the opponent's like, man, I really don't want to have to deal with 11 health all at once by dealing with this Harbinger and this Doomsayer, but I also don't really want to leave out a 7/4 either, because that becomes an issue. The question though is like, what deck really cares enough about having the Doomsayer clear the board that they really value a 7/4 on board all that much? You know what I mean? Like if they're thinking about control and defense and willing to risk a Doomsayer going off, then they're probably going to be a more slow deck. Is a 4-mana 7/4 worth it if it sticks around on board for that kind of deck? It doesn't really trade that effectively. If it was like a 4/7, you'd almost be happier because you use it to trade into your opponent's boards multiple times, whereas this is like, it's just going to kind of die off. I mean, I don't know. I just think control decks have like better ways to deal with problems faster. I think this is the sort of thing the opponent just like leaves on board and they got 4 3/3s out there and it's like, man, I just played this and it's taking me forever to get the Doomsayer and it's like, man, I'm dead. Should have just ran an AoE, right? So I don't know. Cool idea. Pretty fun, but I think kind of clunky. Moving on here to the Disciple of Demise, another event card. 8-mana 8/8 dragon. Battlecry, randomly destroy another minion. Repeat for each dragon you're holding, which kind of cool for like a big late game dragon deck here where this could just wipe out the opponent's board in essence. This can hit your stuff, but if you're playing from behind, that's not going to be a problem. Your board might already be empty, so just using this to develop an 8/8, clear their board just for doing what you want to do anyway, which is holding dragons. It's actually really promising. Not every dragon deck will want to do that because some will want to be ahead on board. This wouldn't be worth the risk. They won't have a big enough hand necessarily to make this great. But I don't know, some control dragon decks already getting like into the late game because of a Colossal or Deathwing or whatever, like, yeah, maybe this makes a lot of sense. Also randomly generating this sometimes seems like it could be very powerful as well. So this is a surprisingly good card for a random little neutral. I think this could be sneaky good. And then finally here, we have Sands of Time, a 1-mana neutral spell. It's got Rewind. Discover a spell from any class or just your class after you rewind. So find something cool to do for 1 mana. If you don't like that, then you can narrow the field a little bit and, just find something from your class instead. I think this is totally playable and fine. Like, number one, Thief Rogue style stuff would love this, being able to find a nice little spell from another class. 1 mana overhead's not crazy, do this early. But then, narrowing the field is a cool little choice as well. So you get a total look at 6 cards for decks that are just looking for stuff to do in a pinch. Maybe have some cheap spell synergies on top of that. Yeah, I think this is a totally fine, flexible tool for that scenario. All right, so all that said, a bunch of new cards. Let's go ahead and rate all of these from 1 to 5 stars. Ragnaros the Great Fire is a 5-star card. Envoy of the End is a 3-star card. Deathwing Worldbreaker is a 5-star card. Chromatis is a 4-star card. Flight Maneuvers is a 4-star card. Chamber of Aspects is a 4-star card. Warmaster Blackhorn is a 2-star card. Abyssian is a 4-star card. Supply Run is a 3-star card. Battlefield Blaster is a 2-star card. Dark Iron Harbinger is a 2-star card. Disciple of Demise is a 4-star card. Sands of Time is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. New cards, insane stuff. So excited to see Colossals, man. Actually so sick. Yeah, really excited for this set and upcoming card reviews. Stay tuned for lots more cards, hopefully lots more Colossals. And I don't know, just share your thoughts on all these down below. Hopefully the Herald stuff made sense. It's a pretty confusing keyword, honestly, a lot going on, but I'll you know, people in the comments will help out too. But just remember, like, all of the stuff gets better basically, and gets like potentially very scary. Doubling all the numbers goes a really long way. So all in all, yeah, exciting stuff. Thanks for watching as always, and until next time, game on.